paths intersect in a holy place.
They knew one another, and so it was a very tight-knit, close community.
But only one makes it out alive. How does this woman wind up dead on the floor? A peaceful congregation held hostage by fear.
We were scared. Everybody in church was scared.
And an investigation that leads down a dark and twisted road. You checked her freezers. You saw a full-on dog. This is where strange meets stranger than fiction. My name is Aphrodite Jones. As a true crime author, I take on controversial cases. I track down the story behind the story, and I won't stop until I get the truth. Springfield Township, Pennsylvania seems like the kind of place you only see in the movies. Here, neighbors don't lock their doors, and almost everyone's life revolves around God, family, and country. This is a world that's a throwback to a different century. People actually care about each other, and you don't get that today in America much anymore. I've decided to investigate this case because it's a classic example of having to dig deep to find the truth, and also proves the deeper you dig, the more complicated and stranger it gets. It's August 26, 1993, and Mary Jane Fonder has been taking care of her father ever since her mother passed away just a year earlier. But it isn't easy. At 80, Ed Fonder is frail and unhappy, living out his golden years without his wife. On that summer day, according to Mary Jane, her father decides to leave the house.
I'm going for a walk.
Apparently, he went out for a walk one day to get the mail or take a walk, and he never came back.
After searching the area for her father, but unable to find him, Mary Jane realizes she has to call the police.
I was pretty much the primary investigator during that time when she called and said that her father went missing. We had police dogs out. We had an aerial search done of the property. I dealt with her extensively. And since I was a female, it was the inkling that it would be easier for me to speak to her rather than a male police officer.
So what kind of report did you build?
A good report. Very good. I actually stopped and checked in pretty much weekly while I was on duty at some point, just to follow up with the case, to talk with her, to chat with her.
Officer Kim Trial worked the mysterious case for 3 months, but no clues about Ed Fonder's whereabouts ever surface. It's as if he's vanished into thin air. She had to be heartbroken after her father disappeared. Thank God for the church and the people in it, because that's where Mary Jane turned. The congregation Mary Jane turns to is Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church. It's more than just a place for spiritual worship. It's a community. For over 10 years, Trinity Evangelical becomes almost like a second family for Mary Jane.
She was a very happy person all the time, and she always wanted to be friendly with you.
She's a wonderful church lady.
And very dedicated to the church.
And does a lot of things for the church. Helping out at funerals and weddings and...
Decorating the church. She did it all.
The church is still important to the people who live here. It isn't something that has become a relic. It is really essential to people's lives. People join forces in the church, people socialize at the church, and that's why you see churches on every other street corner. It's very much a big part of life in Bucks County. In 2005, a breath of fresh air comes through the door when Trinity Evangelical welcomes Pastor Greg Shrieves. The former pro golf executive became a minister after realizing he needed to take his life in a new direction. I'm trying to understand how it is you would determine to leave the sporting life, the high life, for the world of ministry.
It didn't happen overnight. It happened over a period of time. It's a whole other way of life for me that And so I use my head and my heart in ways that I never had before. And
So it's a calling.
it is a calling. Yes, it is a calling.
We had interim pastors for about 2 years before he came. So it was nice to get a pastor who was staying.
Here comes along a man who revitalizes the church. I mean, everyone loved this pastor.
I've been in the area for a while now.
As Greg Shrieves settles in, the energetic new pastor makes a huge impression on the congregation, especially on Mary Jane Fonder.
Everything was always positive, and there was nothing ever wrong. Everything was fine, and I think that's the way most people saw her. But she was quirky. She wore a wig.
Mary Jane feels a genuine friendly connection to Pastor Shrieves. She often leaves him meals on his doorstep and messages at his home.
She would leave on my voicemail at the parsonage, "Oh, Pastor, how are you today? Hope you're having a nice day," and on and on. I just looked at them as innocent phone calls.
Hello, Pastor Shrieves. It's Mary Jane. And I was thinking it would be lovely. They have some beautiful flowers on that altar.
And Mary Jane isn't the only person to be impressed by Pastor Shrieves. There's also 41-year-old Rhonda Smith, who started coming to the church just a few months after Shrieves arrived.
Rhonda and her mother came into the church, and they were looking for a church home. So I met with them and invited them to come to worship, which they did. So did Rhonda's father.
Once they got comfortable with us, they were very comfortable in the church. And Rhonda took a liking to me. She just did. And we clicked, I should say. And we palled around a little bit.
But lately, Rhonda has been having a tough time. She can't keep up with her bills, and she's behind on her rent. When Pastor Shrieves hears Rhonda is in need, he realizes that the parish can come to her aid.
She needed money. She wasn't working. And the Smiths were great people. They didn't have a lot of resources to help Rhonda out.
Rhonda, I called you in.
So I asked Rhonda if she could use or would want some help.
It would be a great help to you and all the things you're going through.
And because we had people in the congregation who had means and knew they would help out.
The members of the church adopted her as if she was there for years.
As if she was really their own child to take care of.
Yes. I mean, you had church members who had invited her to the house. They invited her out to restaurants to eat with them, sit with them at church functions, have her in the choir. I mean, it was a community that adopted her.
About giving,
Rhonda is very touched that her new church family treats her like one of their own.
Rhonda asked me if she could address the congregation to thank them for helping her out. I always look for chances for people in the congregation to witness, to say thank you or something, a blessing or whatever it may be. So I said, absolutely, Rhonda.
I just wouldn't have made it through this year without all of you, and I'm so happy that I found a home here. And I just want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. And I want you to know that if I can do anything for any of you ever, please don't hesitate.
That's what it's all about, isn't it?
What a moment that had to be for her, to stand up and say thank you to her congregation. I mean, that takes real humility and love. But it's not just Rhonda that gets a helping hand from Pastor Shrieves. He also does what he can to look out for Mary Jane.
I knew that Mary Jane felt alone, so I would always try to invite her to sit with the members of Trinity who were there, to include her in things. So I did, because I knew probably no one else would do that. So I always made it a point to say, Mary Jane, why don't you sit here?
Some people start to notice that Mary Jane eats up the special attention.
Oh, it's so good to have you with us. Everybody's happy to see you.
I knew that Mary Jane had a crush on Pastor Shrieves, and she showed it by always wanting to hang around, to be around.
Pastor Shrieves' message at Trinity Evangelical is simple. Everyone is part of the family. Whether it's helping Rhonda Smith through a rough patch or making Mary Jane feel welcome among the congregation.
I knew the lives of everybody in that congregation, what they did at work, what the kids did after school, because I wanted to be rooted in this community and know my people.
But every congregation has its secrets. Coming up,
Everybody in church was scared. We were watching our backs.
I slept at someone else's house because I was frightened.
Trinity Evangelical Church is a place where anyone can seek comfort and find a new life in once hopeless situations.
And we have a success story today.
It's a parish for people like Mary Jane Fonda, who came here after her father suddenly disappeared, and Rhonda Smith, who found a second family that embraced her during hard times.
To me, that's one of the charms of a small church. You get to know the families in a way that you don't in a large setting where you just sort of pass by and you don't know who's who.
On January 23, 2008, Judy Zellner arrives at the church to do some afternoon chores and unexpectedly finds the front door open.
And I said, boy, whoever left this door unlocked is going to hear from me. We were going to get a new secretary the next week. And I thought, well, maybe she came and was checking things out.
Judy frantically dials 911.
There's a girl murdered in our office.
Paramedics quickly arrive. All Judy knows is that a badly injured woman is lying on the floor. Now the real horror sets in as she discovers who it is.
Her head just rolled towards me, and I went, oh my God, that's Rhonda. That's my friend Rhonda. So what is she doing here?
She was on the ground behind a desk. She had a lot of hair, which I'm sure absorbed a lot of the blood. There was a puddle of blood right there, but there wasn't blood splatter all over the room.
To find this woman on the floor in a church. What horror. It appears that Rhonda has been shot in the head. But even more shocking than the gruesome scene is the fact that Rhonda's still alive.
I could hear them, and the one man said, oh my God, she has a heartbeat.
She's rushed to the hospital and put on life support. When Pastor Shrieves gets the terrible news, he hurries back from a 3-day parish retreat, stunned that Rhonda has been shot.
I asked her to sit in the church from 9 to noon those 3 days because I needed someone in the office.
Good morning, church office.
When the state police called you, what are you thinking?
My heart sunk. I just couldn't imagine that something so profane could have taken place in a space that was so sacred. It just didn't make sense to me.
Rhonda clings to life, but sadly not for long. She's pronounced brain dead, and that evening the decision is made to take her off life support.
We went into Rhonda's room, and we circled and held hands and said a prayer for her. And then they pronounced her dead.
In the aftermath, the congregation comes together in support of Rhonda's parents.
Rhonda's parents were faithful worshipers through all of this, and they were, I think, good models of grace in the midst of that horrific tragedy.
Many in the church, including Mary Jane Fonda, comfort the Smiths in their time of need. Meanwhile, state investigators search for clues in Rhonda Smith's death.
Your investigators have gone there and they've done their homework and they've done interviews. What is the theory initially that investigators had about this death?
There were a number of people who believed that this was a suicide.
I think the possibility of suicide was the first reaction because Rhonda did have problems.
It's well known that Rhonda had been having money troubles. But there was another, more likely reason why Rhonda may have taken her own life. She'd been struggling with bipolar disorder for years.
She was bipolar. She wanted to be a teacher, but she could never get a job in teaching because of her disability.
She told me about a few times when she was suicidal, but never went into real detail. She just said, just talk me out of it. And we were on the phone for about 2 hours.
Be fine, I promise you.
If she was suffering from mental illness, if this was a suicide, to think not even the church could save her. Nothing could save her. What a horrible moment to have to live through.
To think that someone has killed themselves in the church. But there's no smoking gun to the suicide theory. In fact, there's no gun at all. The bullet fragments indicate Rhonda was killed with a .38 or .357 caliber handgun. But there was no gun in Rhonda's hand, or anywhere at the scene.
I generally would rule out a suicide if no gun was found. But nobody was sure whether anybody cleaned up the gun in order to protect Rhonda from being accused of suicide.
Is it possible that someone took the gun away to protect the reputation of the church? Then, 1 week after Rhonda's death, any speculation of suicide is dismissed for good when the medical examiner's report notes a crucial and definitive detail.
The medical examiner found on Rhonda's, the outside of her hand, what's called stippling marks.
Stippling is the signature mark left by gunpowder ejected from a gun's barrel. And the position of the stippling on Rhonda's hand can only mean one thing.
Rhonda put her hand up, and depending on the distance of the gun to the body, you'll get different types of stippling. And as it turns out, the gun was shot within 3 feet of Rhonda.
It's a cold-blooded murder at close range. But that's about all police know. With a mysterious killer still at large, panic spreads through the church.
We were scared. Everybody in church was scared. We were watching our backs.
For a couple of nights, I slept at someone else's house because I was frightened. I didn't know who could have done this.
And you're thinking it's possible, since they got away with one murder in the church, that now they might actually focus on you.
Come back, yes. Yeah.
Can you imagine sitting in church, going to sermons, and realizing that somebody has murdered one of your fellow parishioners inside that church?
The investigation starts to come into focus when a few parishioners recall a strange encounter. It happened just a few days before Rhonda was killed.
Sunday before Rhonda was murdered, there was this man came to church. And he was scary looking.
He was quirky and ill at ease physically and moving around a lot.
During communion, someone notices the stranger trying to steal the wine cup. But more than that, it's the cryptic message he delivers after the service that now puts everyone on edge.
He said to my one friend, he said, this would be a good church to rob if you wanted to rob a church.
Why would somebody come out from nowhere and wind up in this small little church?
I guess you could say maybe he's just driving by, figures he can get some money by walking away with something on a Sunday morning, and it's kind of easy pickings for him.
Did this mysterious drifter return to the church? Was Rhonda Smith shot to death in a robbery gone wrong? Coming up.
A roadblock was looking for somebody who fit the description of this unknown white male.
And then it became crystal clear when we found the gun.
I'm in Quakertown, Pennsylvania, investigating the shocking murder of Rhonda Smith, a woman who simply appears to have been at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Why would someone want this poor young woman dead? She was a kind soul. She never harmed a fly.
How could this be? In the aftermath of the tragedy, investigators hone in on a possible suspect. A mysterious man who showed up at the church only 3 days before the murder. One parishioner claims to have overheard the man saying the church would be an easy target for a robbery.
No one knew if he was an itinerant individual or whatever passing through. He apparently appeared and acted very strange, and then disappeared and got into a white van.
Did the man come back looking to rob the church and find Rhonda was in his way?
The police did a massive search and sweep for this individual, stopping cars right and left, checking the hotels and motels, looking for the white van, looking for the individual.
But as the days go by, the shadowy stranger is never seen again.
We found no evidence of a stranger other than, people said that there was a stranger at the church.
You couldn't ID the person. So it was just a complete dead-end lead?
Correct.
I'm not surprised police didn't find anyone. The way Rhonda was killed doesn't point to a stranger. Rhonda was shot twice in the head, at close range. To me, that's not some random robbery attempt. That's personal. Investigators from the Pennsylvania State Police are thinking the same thing. And soon the focus shifts to those who knew Rhonda better than anyone. The congregation. And as police speak to different parishioners, one name keeps coming up. Mary Jane Fonder.
Mary Jane Fonder? The little old lady who all she does is bring flowers and gifts and good joy to the church? So what was the picture that you got of who she was?
A person who was very upset because she had been there for 14 years, and during all that time, they never accepted her like they did Rhonda Smith, who was only there for about 3 years.
Mary Jane's resentment would spiral out of control and into fantasy. She began telling herself that she was being left out of events that never happened.
Like one Wednesday night when we had choir practice, Mary Jane saw that there was a few cars outside, and she thought we were having a big birthday party for Rhonda. She just imagined a lot of things, and I think it upset her more and more.
And when investigators questioned Pastor Shrieves about Mary Jane, slowly the wheels begin to turn in his mind as well.
I began to say to myself, it just could have been her. It began to make sense to me, especially in light of the phone calls and the messages.
At first, Pastor Shrieves thought Mary Jane's endless phone calls were completely innocent.
Pastor Shrieves, it's Mary Jane.
But then, she starts leaving him more than just messages.
She was putting frozen food in my kitchen. I would open and there was food in there that I didn't buy. So she was actually in the house.
I mean, you got a violator coming
Right.
into your house.
Yeah.
I mean, it's trespassing.
Yeah. Right.
I know, forgive us our trespasses, but this is a whole different level.
It was creepy for me, yeah.
But Mary Jane's obsession with Pastor Shrieves goes far beyond calls and casseroles.
One day, she was in your office. Tell me about that day.
She was telling me her story. And so about growing up in North Philadelphia and wanting to dance and not being able to, and family moving here. And out of the blue, she said to me,
You know there's something between us, don't you?
What does that mean? She thinks they're having a love affair? In her head?
Investigators theorize that when Mary Jane starts to notice the attention Rhonda gets from Pastor Shrieves, she snaps.
Rhonda, why don't you come up here and tell everybody how good you feel right now?
Mary Jane did in fact believe that because Rhonda was a beautiful young woman, that the pastor did have some romantic designs on Rhonda, which would have made sense. He's a young single man and she's a young single woman.
Police decide it's time to sit down with Mary Jane. But trying to get some answers proves to be next to impossible. Investigators say they're up against a woman lost in her own chaotic world.
And his little ears were all bald. I think it's from the gardening I did.
She goes off on tangents. You'll ask a question and you're still sitting there. 15 minutes later, she still hasn't answered the question and you have no idea what she was talking about.
That's an interesting way to put it. So she not only goes off on a tangent, but she goes off of that tangent onto another tangent.
Correct. Very frustrating for investigators.
Sometimes it smells bad because you know it's manure, but that's okay. That's
She
okay.
actually was driving the officers crazy. I mean, 2 seasoned criminal detectives trying to focus in on a homicide, and she's not going for any of it.
He's one hell of a man.
Still, investigators are hoping they have the upper hand on Mary Jane. Ballistic experts have determined the bullets used to kill Rhonda came from a .38 or .357 caliber handgun. And little does Mary Jane realize, the detectives know she owns a .38.
The state police had no trouble finding out that a gun was registered in the name of Mary Jane Fonder.
You own a gun?
Will she tell them the truth?
I owned a .38, but I think I threw it in the lake years ago.
She indicated that she had disposed of the gun years earlier by throwing it in Lake Nakamixon because she had fired it and it scared her and she was nervous, so she threw it away.
Mary Jane Fonder is now the prime suspect in the murder of fellow church member Rhonda Smith. But investigators are going to need much more than just theories if they want to prove her guilt. Coming up,
We had divers scouring the whole area, and we couldn't find it.
She said, I didn't do this. I didn't shoot her. It wasn't me.
February 2008. In the weeks following the brutal slaying of Rhonda Smith, investigators have narrowed in on their prime suspect, Mary Jane Fonder. They believe Mary Jane became obsessed with the idea that Rhonda and Pastor Greg Shrieves were having an affair, and that jealousy led her down a path to murder.
It was all fathomed in her mind. Rhonda was a sweet girl, and she didn't deserve that at all. There was nothing going on between her and the pastor.
This is beyond strange. This is where strange meets stranger than fiction. But there's no proof Mary Jane shot Rhonda, or that she was anywhere near the church. In fact, Mary Jane tells investigators she was having her hair done at the time of the murder. And her alibi completely checks out.
We go to the salon. Turns out, she was there. She signed in, and she put the specific time.
Did they do any search of her house? Did anyone ever ask to do that?
Well, that was the one of the biggest obstacles in the investigation and the prosecution of the case. We didn't have enough probable cause to get into her house.
There's nothing to tie her to this homicide. No fingerprints, no DNA, no weapon, no anything. Mary Jane continues to come to church, and for Pastor Shrieves, it's more than a little uncomfortable. Each week as he stands at his pulpit, he wonders if his newest sermon might just be his last.
I knew that Mary Jane might be a suspect in this murder. I couldn't say that to the congregation because she may not have been. It was very off-putting to me because she would turn or pull her purse up or look into her purse or something during worship, and I'd have to stop and just to make sure that she wasn't going to pull a gun or something out.
You're thinking she would actually pull a gun out in the middle of your sermon?
I didn't know that. I thought maybe if she was angry enough that I wasn't giving her attention, that it would have been possible.
But if Mary Jane thinks anyone at church suspects she murdered Rhonda, she sure doesn't show it. In fact, she does everything she can to support Rhonda's parents in their grief.
Mary Jane would go and visit even during times that they really didn't want any visitors and sort of thrust herself upon them.
Let me come in, I'll cut it up for you.
Well, 1 second. She would bake them a pie, and it's hard to refuse entry to somebody who's standing at your front door with a freshly baked pie, offering sympathy and friendship.
Oh, I know Rhonda would be so happy.
When Mary Jane sits down with the Smiths, they can't help but notice that her shoes are ripped and worn.
Rhonda's mother felt badly for the way that Mary Jane Fonder was dressed, and she offered Mary Jane Fonder Rhonda's sneakers, which were brand new, and said, we can't use these anymore, maybe you can use them.
Look at these!
Mary Jane coveted those sneakers and enjoyed the fact that she was being given something of Rhonda's to remember her by.
She's so sorry about poor Rhonda who was killed. Really? That's okay with her? To walk in the shoes of a dead woman, a woman who was murdered in the church. If the police want to prove Mary Jane killed Rhonda, they have to find her gun. Nobody buys her excuse that years ago she threw it in Lake Nakamixon. Still, a team of divers descend into the waters of a lake that covers more than 2 square miles. But nothing is found in its dark and murky depths. And after days of scouring the lake, the search is called off.
So the gun was everything in terms of being able to catch her.
You're looking at somebody who lost a lot of sleep during the investigation, fearing that we might never be able to solve this. And that's the way the case was looking. It was really looking like we have a good idea who it is. We can't prove this case.
Then, on March 29th, 2008, 2 months after Rhonda's murder, there's an unexpected break in the case. A father and son decide to go fishing on Lake Nakamixon when suddenly the boy spots something in the dirt. It's a gun. They call the police, who examine the weapon. Turns out to be a .38, in good condition, with no signs of any wear and tear. The registration numbers are clearly visible. There's no doubt this is Mary Jane's gun. And it seems like it's been lying by the lake for just days, not years, as she has claimed.
You were able to ballistically test and see that the box of bullets were a match to the bullets that entered into Rhonda's head.
The forensic examiner, who had done the original analysis of the fragments taken from Rhonda, was able to match those with the gun that was found. As a result of that, we obtained an arrest warrant and arrested her on Monday.
But this is far from the end of the line in one very twisted tale. Coming up,
Nobody wanted Mary Jane to come back to church. And we all talked about it. We said, well, we just won't let her in.
This was not an easy case to put together.
On April 1st, 2008, Mary Jane Fonda is charged in the murder of Rhonda Smith. Her arrest is welcome news to her Pennsylvania congregation.
It was a sense of relief that Mary Jane wasn't there anymore because you didn't have to talk to her.
In late October, Mary Jane's trial begins. From the start, Mary Jane vehemently denies she had anything to do with killing Rhonda.
Every time she was paraded into the courtroom, there would be cameras everywhere. They'd be sticking microphones in her way, and she would keep about her mantra about being innocent. She's the second victim. She didn't do this.
Did you kill Rhonda? No, did you kill her? What happened?
But it's her ultimate act of defiance that sets Mary Jane apart from any defendant David Zealous has ever seen.
At the first court appearance, my investigator said, "She's wearing Rhonda's sneakers." And I looked down, I'm like, oh my God, this is unbelievable to me that anybody would dare to do such a thing.
She had an absolute arrogance about her in those moments.
It's a great way to put it. Yes, she did.
The prosecution puts forth its case. They say Mary Jane brazenly walked into the church office, shot Rhonda once, and then delivered a second bullet that lodged in her brain. Next, Mary Jane went to the hair salon to establish an alibi. Police believe at some point Mary Jane got rid of the gun and the remaining bullets by tossing them from her car as she drove by Lake Nakamixon.
I believe that she just assumed that it landed in the water and she just drove off.
If that gun hadn't fallen along the riverbed rather than down in the river,
she gets away with murder.
The trial lasts 10 days, and the jury needs only 6 hours to render a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. And on December 5th, 2008, Mary Jane Fonda is sentenced to life without parole.
I'm addicted with Rhonda. I'm the second one from the church.
Her conviction ends a nearly year-long nightmare for the congregation at Trinity Evangelical Church. But with one case closed, another still remains open. Does Mary Jane's conviction shed new light on the shadows of her past? What really happened to Ed Fonda, her dad, back in 1993?
I'm going for a walk.
Authorities now speculate that Rhonda may not be the first person to have died at the hands of Mary Jane. Prosecutor David Zealous believes Mary Jane had reasons to wish her father would just disappear.
She told us that she was oftentimes frustrated with the way he treated her, ordering her around kind of like his caregiver instead of his daughter. And we were able to trace the fact that she, even after he was missing for years, she was just cashing these checks that he was getting from his pension.
But stealing isn't murder. There are many pieces of evidence David Zealous needs to prove Mary Jane killed her father, including the most crucial of all, a body.
He had no clue as to where his body was. She wasn't confessing.
Zealous isn't alone in his suspicions. Kim Trial spoke exclusively to me. She recalls that something just didn't feel right when Mary Jane Fonda reported her father's disappearance back in 1993.
Let me just move some of this out the way. You sit right there.
The house was in disarray inside and outside. It wasn't anything that was well maintained or upkept. She wasn't necessarily upset that her father was missing. Mary Jane can ramble for a while. She can talk your ear off. And
what did she talk about?
Just anything at all. What was on TV, what was happening, just general stuff that really made no sense sometimes.
And I think he might have taken out those fur balls. Mary Jane.
But when Officer Trial does get Mary Jane to talk about her father, she has trouble buying the story that he just got up and walked away.
The man walked with a cane, couldn't really get around. And for him to amble around the property was not highly likely.
So, what's running through your mind at that point?
Something not right is going on here, is what's running through my mind. Very uneasy feeling about it.
As Officer Trial does a sweep of Mary Jane's house, she makes her way into the kitchen and finds something that totally shocks her.
Mary Jane, do you mind if I take a look in your freezer?
As a police officer, you check everything. So I inquired and asked if I could check the freezers, and she allowed me to.
Is that a dog in your freezer?
Oh, wait a minute. Okay. Are you telling me you saw a full-on dog?
I saw a dog in the freezer in a bag. I was honestly freaked out about it.
Oh, my daddy's dog died, so I wanted to take it to the vet, so I froze it, find out why. And you have looked through my whole house.
Officer Trial returns to the house several times, hoping Mary Jane will let her guard down.
I just kept going back. I just kept going back to try to keep a rapport with her and keep an open line of communication with her. And there was a period of time when we were having a conversation where I thought I was on the verge of getting a confession.
But after 3 months, Mary Jane decides to put an end to the investigation.
Do you mind if we just finish this up? I want to help you find your dad.
Mary Jane called the police department and said that she didn't want me coming back to the house.
I'm done.
She's worried about her missing dad? She wants to find her father? She's more concerned about the police harassing her. With no confession and no body, the investigation shuts down. A fact that still haunts Kim Trial 20 years later.
And I still live with this case to this day personally, because I feel a responsibility that I was not able to find out where Ed Fonda is, what happened, and if I had been able to solve it, maybe the Rhonda Smith case would have never occurred. I live with that all the time.
The disappearance of Ed Fonda remains an open investigation. We wrote to Mary Jane for a comment on what really happened to her father, but she never responded to our inquiry. And while this case may never be solved, there's no question about who's responsible for the tragic murder of Rhonda Smith.